Hello, this is IBornStudio podcast show, episode number 17. I am Calix, your humble host. Today we are interviewing a different character, Steven Capsuto. He works as a translator who gets other languages via texts and books, which he then writes them in English for these writers all over the world. The other side of his story, he's an author of alternate channels, queer images of the 20th century. Yes, Steven is a representation of lesbian and gay Americans. Don't look at him just on the cover. He is a talented writer, a detailed historian, and a voice for his followers. What matters most for this show, he was able to skillfully research content to create a full manuscript over 600 pages, walk through barriers, and had many mentors along the way to accomplish his goals. Please take a listen. Tell us about yourself and your background.
My background is, my day job, I'm a translator. People send me texts and books and documents, and I put them into English and send them back. I grew up in Philadelphia. When I started working on this book, I was, 23 years old back in 1989 when I was a grad student. And it's a book about the history. It was supposed to be a history of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender characters on television. And what I very quickly found out when I started doing the research was that TV networks in the U.S. at that time were really not putting bi or trans characters on TV. So it mostly became a history of lesbian and gay characters. And the way it came about was I was volunteering with a LGBT counseling hotline, like a crisis line. And we were getting a lot of calls from lesbian and gay teenagers who were contemplating suicide. And when we would ask them, well, what do you think gay people's lives are like? What do you think your future is that you feel so bleak about it? They would always say, I only know what I see on television, which got me thinking about the impact of media images on young gay people at a time when not a lot of people were out of the closet and visible. And that's sort of how this started.
Do you have a business? Personal business?
Yes. So my day-to-day business is I'm a translator. I translate documents into English from a few different languages, and then on weeks when I don't have enough work coming in, which doesn't happen too often, but it does happen, I have a sideline where I publish books that I've translated, mostly dealing with Jewish topics, books that are in the public domain now. They're old enough, usually first-person accounts from the 19th and early 20th centuries about Jewish life in different parts of the world. And so I created my own book imprint, and I published those. And then I also have published this revised version of alternate channels, Queer Images on 20th Century Television, where the first edition had been from Ballantine, which is part of Random House. And then for the new edition, I asked my agent if we could get the rights back and I could put it out myself so I would have more control over, what it would look like.
When did you first start your business?
As a translator, I started my business in 2003. I had been working for 14 years in-house as an IT person, a computer, programmer and tech support person, first at an insurance company, then at a university, and then I decided I really would rather work for myself. So I started out freelancing as an IT person, but my training is as a translator. That's what I studied in college, and I realized I would rather be doing that. And so around 2003, as IT jobs were ending, I started replacing those clients with translation clients.
Very good. As a translator, can you tell us how do you make money?
It depends on the language. The languages I work from, which are all Romance languages, I work from Spanish and French and Catalan and Portuguese, those you usually charge by how many words are in the original document. So, if a client comes to me and they send me a Word document, I have Word tell me how many words are in it, and I multiply that by my rate, and I tell them, that's what it's going to cost, although I do have a minimum for short jobs. And and when we discuss terms, how many days do they have to make the payment, and so on. And I charge a little extra if the original is a PDF or an image or something, because that takes longer to translate from than a Word document.
Or what type of resources or mentor that helped you on your journey?
There were, because I've worked in different fields, there were different types of mentors. When I started writing alternate channels, sort of my icon, my role model was a media historian named Vito Russo, who had written about gay images in cinema and had written the book The Celluloid Closet, and he gave lectures. And basically, we had corresponded briefly during the last year of his life. He died very young relatively young during the AIDS crisis, the height of it. But he was very supportive when I told him about my project, that I was doing something similar with television. One of the ways I publicized the original edition of the book was I did a lot of lectures at colleges and universities and community groups and libraries and film festivals and so on. And really, my lecture format is Vito's lecture format. I just made it about television instead of about movies. But I had seen him give his talk, where he would come in with film clips of movies from the 20s to the present and talk you through the history. And so I thought, I'll just do that same thing with TV. I'll show up with video clips from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on, and talk through the social history of those images and how the status of LGBT people's lives have changed in America over that period. So he was very important. And of course, in my other fields, there were other professionals who gave me advice or taught me aspects of the business, and who I owe a great deal to.
You said it was a semi-finalist at Stonewall Book Award. Tell us about that.
So yes, back then, I forget what it was called. It was, I think, called the American Library Association Lesbian and Gay Book Awards. It's now called the Stonewall Book Awards. And they've changed the terminology. So now if a book gets suggested by multiple people, it counts as a nominee, and then there's a finalist and the winner. But back then, when they announced the winners, the terms they used were semi-finalist, finalist, and winner. So it was a semi-finalist in the nonfiction category for what is now the Stonewall Book Award. And it's a book that's been used widely, since it came out in 2000. It's been cited widely by other historians. Some very prominent people in the field have referred to it as one of the seminal works on the topic of gay images on television, and it's been used as a textbook, in various colleges and universities.
During the research portion of your work, from archive materials and thousands of broadcast recordings, how did you get that zeal to approach this kind of resilience, the work ethic that you have? Explain to us.
I was very lucky in that around the time that I decided I wanted to write this book, which was, again, coming out of that experience with the counseling center, and also just talking to older gay people about what the images they had seen growing up and how that had affected their self-image at a time when we were largely invisible in society. That gave me the drive. I was really seeing the book at the time as almost a manual for media activism, which is sort of the shift in focus between the original edition written in the 90s and the 20th anniversary edition that came out this year. The current version I was approaching almost as a history book, right? Or as a nostalgia book about popular culture. Whereas at the time we were in the thick of it, and we were saying, how do we improve the way society sees us? We're fighting for our rights, and we're, often portrayed on TV as, either violent criminals at that time, particularly in the 70s. There's a period of 2 years in the 70s where every queer character in a TV drama in the U.S. was a serial killer or a child molester, or, and if we were fighting for our rights and that was the image the public had of us, we needed to challenge that and try and get the media to improve, how they were portraying us. And even in the 80s, when I was coming into the movement, most of the images were that gay people were men dying of AIDS, and that was it. And that's all we did. We showed up for an episode and we died. So I was approaching it as this urgently needed manual on activism, and fortunately I was working 2 blocks from the main Central Free Library in Philadelphia, and so on my lunch break every day I would go to the library and go through the archival materials and go through old newspapers and put more and more information into my database. And then once I had enough information, I started collecting the video recordings of the current and older shows and writing to TV scriptwriters and showrunners and executives and some of the early pioneering activists and saying, well, will you talk to me for this book?
Nice. Okay, now you did all that hard work. Now tell us, how did you move from there to get all these shows, All in the Family, In the Living Color, Dawson Creek, Friends, among many? How did you do that?
So, and Ellen, today is the 23rd anniversary of the coming out episode of Ellen, which was like the first time we saw an out and proud gay character as the lead on a show, as opposed to the neighbor up the hall or something like that. So that was kind of cool, right? So anyway, yes. So what I started doing was, at the time there was no YouTube, there were no streaming services, and you couldn't yet in the U.S. buy whole seasons of shows on home video. And so what I had to do was every week I would look through every single page of TV Guide and mark all the likely shows. So I knew that 5 days a week there was a certain channel that was running Medical Center. And so I just, every night taped Medical Center until I got the episode I wanted, because they didn't tell you what episode was airing. And I had 3 VCRs running. This was the 90s, so they were VHS machines. 3 VCRs connected to different cable boxes, 3 different cable boxes in my home. And between taping the new shows and trying to get the older shows, and then some people who knew I was working on this would mail me video cassettes. So I would get, videos from strangers in California sending me things, in Philadelphia. Some of them bootleg copies of things that weren't, available otherwise. And then as this was all coming in, I was putting the information into the databases and sorting everything chronologically and seeing how the different pieces fit together.
Wow. Steven, you also lead a historian consultant for Apple TV.
I was a consultant on their documentary Visible, about, I guess, August. So it's a series called Visible. It's a 5-part documentary on Apple TV Plus, and it's about the history of, it's sort of 2 things. It's a history of how the status of LGBTQ people has changed in the U.S. since the 50s, and also using television shows as the window through which to tell that story. And they have interviews with all kinds of fantastic people from the world of television, people from the world of activism, and my job was to help them find the archival clips, particularly from the 20th and early 21st century, to point them toward episodes that they should look at, to help them find clips. And then they did the really hard work. I mean, I put in many, many hours on the show, but they did the really hard work, which was putting all of that together into a compelling and entertaining and very interesting 5 hours of television.
Oh, right. Well, this is a great story for people who listen or read this kind of history. You worked so hard to accomplish this goal, 20 years forward, and then come with the revised edition. This is impressive. Now, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that the book is available in paperback through most paperback vendors, and it's on almost every ebook platform. And if people are interested in this subject, most days on Twitter I post a feature called Today in Queer TV History with video clips and background, and I'm on Twitter. It's at Steven Capsuto, StevenCapsuto, or on Facebook, Alternate Channels is the name of the page. It's the same as the name of the book.
Well, we will get to the contact. We'll have about 3 questions to give you in the end.
Oh, sure. Sorry about that.
And a signature question in the end. Plus, we'll see how you write to you, contact you, buy your book. The first question is, what are you passionate about in your life?
Passionate about in my life? I mean, other than friends and family, I think I'm passionate about getting information out so that people can make decisions based on information and context and facts rather than hunches. And of course, we see a lot of that in the world now, people who think that their hunches are truth, or their hunches are science, or their hunches are history. And so I'm just very, I had studied journalism, which is about that. I had studied history, which is about that. My work as a translator is about facilitating the transfer of information from one place to another, one culture to another. And so I think that's a lot of what I do, is either interpreting the past to the present or interpreting across cultures and sharing information that way.
Nice. Well, Before I go to the second question, you did a lot of work. And to start at 23, that was a very young in person doing so much research, archives, and areas of expertise you use in getting this information that you needed. And you were able to get a historian, which was a mentor of you, Vito, who helped you along the way. And you said you learned a lot from him. To get that book published after 20 years was a great accomplishment. You lectured in college this. You had video history, your research. You acknowledged that. And you launched lots of different articles or blogs.
I was hired to write articles about sort of LGBT aspects of pop culture for a number of books. They were usually either, the reference where there were many different articles by different historians and experts. And also, I had sold some articles to newspapers about LGBT images on television and so on.
Well, let's go to a second question out of the three. What advice would you give someone wanting to pursue a race similar to yours?
Oh, wow. I think you just have to be really focused and driven. It helps if you're a bit of an introvert because it's work that's very solitary. If you're someone who needs to be around people and interacting all the time, probably that might not be the ideal work environment for you. But just have something that you want to say. And the nice thing now is it used to be if you had a message you wanted to get out, you had to find an agent who was willing to represent the book, which I was lucky to do, and find a major publisher, which for the first edition I had. But now with self-publishing, which has changed, it used to be self-publishing meant you paid to have hundreds of copies of a book printed and they sat in your garage and you begged your friends and family to buy them. And that's not how it works now, right? It's all print on demand. So if you have something to say and want to get it out there, you can self-publish it now, which is what I've been doing, basically created my own imprint. And I have, 4 titles out now. But it has to look professional. The covers have to look professional. The type layout has to look professional. And you have to just be very focused and determined and detail-oriented to make sure that both the writing and the presentation are going to impress people.
Good advice. My final signature question. Do you think that you were born for a reason and why?
I don't tend to look at the world that way. I tend to think, we're born, we exist, and we to a certain extent within the means that we have available to us, which has a lot to do with did we have access to money, did we have access to decent education, which, to varying degrees we do or don't. But within that, we choose our own values and what's important to us. I don't believe in predestination or anything like that.
One of the ways to get in touch with you is through Andrea. Am I correct?
Well, she's my publicist and so my PR person rather. And so yes. So if media people want to reach me, they can email me directly. Also, they can find me through my website. My website is alternatechannels.net, and there's an email contact there, or they can contact me through my Twitter timeline at Steven Capsuto, or through my Facebook page for the book, which is called Alternate Channels.
It was great having you, Steven, and
I did too. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I hope you sell a lot of books.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to IBornStudio podcast show with your host, Calix. If you like the show, give us a review. We want to thank our sponsor, Free Conference Call Service, who made it possible for these interviews. You can contact us via IBornStudio or support us on anchor.fm/IBornStudio. Thank you for all your comments.